Leadership is something we often assume people are born with. We look at confident voices, commanding presences, or bold decisions, and we say, that's a natural leader. But the truth is, leadership is not a gift. It's not a title. It's not reserved for the chosen few. Leadership is a skill, and like any skill, it has to be learned, practiced, and nurtured. Think about it. No one is born knowing how to read or write. No one is born knowing how to play an instrument, or build a company, or raise a family. These things require guidance, patience, and a willingness to grow. Leadership is no different. And yet, most of us treat it as if it's automatic, that if someone is good at their job, they should automatically be good at leading people. That if someone has authority, they must know how to inspire. That if someone is in charge, they must know how to serve. But in reality, leadership doesn't come with a job description. It comes with responsibility. So today, I want us to challenge that myth. I want us to see leadership for what it really is: a learned behavior, a discipline, a choice, and most importantly, a responsibility we owe to others, not a privilege we keep for ourselves. Because once we understand that leadership has to be learned, we stop waiting for natural leaders to show up. Instead, we start becoming the leaders the world needs. When most people think about leadership, the first image that comes to mind is usually a person at the top. The one who has the corner office, the big title, the authority to make decisions. We often assume that leadership is about being in charge, about giving orders, about setting direction. But leadership is not about titles. It's not about power. It's not about the authority you hold. Leadership, in its purest form, is about responsibility. It's about the responsibility to serve others, to protect others, to guide others towards something bigger than themselves. Think about it: the best leaders you've ever worked with, studied under, or admired. What made them stand out? Was it their title, their rank, their position? Or was it the way they made you feel? Chances are, it wasn't the title that inspired you, but the sense of trust, safety, and belief they created. A true leader is not remembered for the nameplate on their door, but for the impact they had on the people around them. Leadership is not about being in charge. It's about being responsible for those in your charge. One of the greatest misconceptions about leadership is that it is tied to position. We promote the best salesperson to sales manager, or the best engineer to team leader, assuming that excellence in one role automatically translates to excellence in leadership. But leadership requires an entirely different skill set. Being good at a job is about individual performance. Being good at leadership is about enabling the performance of others. That shift from self to others is not automatic. It requires conscious learning, humility, and practice. Responsibility in leadership is not glamorous. In fact, it often means being the last one to take credit and the first one to take blame. It means putting your team's needs before your own comfort. It means recognizing that the role of a leader is not to stand above the team, but to stand behind them, pushing them forward and lifting them when they fall. This is why leadership can never be defined by a title. It can only be defined by behavior. Consider an example in the military: the leaders eat last. Literally. It's a practice rooted in the belief that those with the greatest responsibility should put their people first, even in something as simple as a meal. This simple act embodies the essence of leadership. It is not about privilege, but about sacrifice. Leadership is not about being served, but about serving. And when people feel that their leader genuinely cares for them, they in turn commit themselves more fully to the mission. Trust becomes the currency of the group, and performance follows naturally. Contrast this with environments where leadership is seen as privilege. In those cultures, leaders use their position for personal gain. They demand compliance rather than earn commitment. They wield authority instead of cultivating trust. The result: people may follow because they have to, but they rarely give their best. Fear replaces trust, silence replaces honesty, and mediocrity replaces innovation. That is the cost of confusing authority with leadership. The true test of leadership is not how a team performs when things are going well, but how they respond when challenges arise. In difficult times, people look to leaders not for orders, but for reassurance. They want to know they're safe. They want to know they're seen. They want to know that their effort has meaning. Leadership, then, is less about strategic brilliance and more about human connection. It is about shouldering the weight of responsibility so that others feel free to focus on their work, their growth, and their contribution. This is why leadership can never be measured by the size of the office or the number of people reporting to you. It can only be measured by the quality of the relationships you build and the lives you impact. Titles may grant authority, but only responsibility earns trust. We like to think that some people are just born leaders. We look at a person who speaks with confidence, who naturally draws attention, who seems comfortable in front of a room, and we say, they're a natural. But this idea that leaders are born is one of the biggest myths we've been told. No one is born knowing how to lead. Leadership, like every other important human skill, has to be learned. Think about it, no baby is born knowing how to walk. They fall, stumble, cry, and try again. No child is born knowing how to read or write. It takes years of learning, practicing, making mistakes, and being guided by those who already know. Leadership is no different. It's a process of discovery, failure, adjustment, and growth. And just like learning to play an instrument or mastering a sport, leadership requires intentional practice. But the problem is that we often confuse talent with leadership. Someone may be charismatic, confident, or intelligent, but that doesn't mean they know how to lead. Charisma might get attention, but it doesn't automatically build trust. Intelligence may solve problems, but it doesn't necessarily inspire people. Leadership is about influence, not control. It's about trust, not fear. It's about creating an environment where others can thrive, not simply showcasing your own abilities. These are learned behaviors. When we believe leadership is innate, we make dangerous assumptions. We assume that the loudest voice in the room must be the leader. We assume that someone who excels at an individual task will automatically excel at guiding a team. We assume that once a person is promoted into leadership, they'll just figure it out. But that's not how it works. Without teaching, without mentorship, without deliberate effort, leadership skills don't magically appear. And when we fail to teach leadership, we end up with people in positions of power who may know their craft, but don't know how to bring out the best in others. History gives us countless examples of leaders who weren't born with it, but who grew into it. Nelson Mandela wasn't born a leader. His leadership was forged in years of struggle, reflection, and sacrifice. Mahatma Gandhi didn't wake up one day with all the answers. He learned through trial, error, and relentless persistence. Even in business, leaders like Howard Schultz of Starbucks or Satya Nadella of Microsoft didn't arrive at leadership fully formed. They learned, they studied, they failed, and they kept improving. This idea that leadership must be learned should be liberating. It means leadership is not reserved for a chosen few. It means anyone who is willing to put in the work can grow into a leader. It means leadership is not about where you start, but about how much you're willing to practice empathy, humility, and responsibility. Think about your own journey. There was probably a time when you were asked to lead something. Maybe a school project, maybe a work assignment, maybe even just helping guide a group of friends. Did you know exactly what to do? Probably not. You experimented. You learned what worked and what didn't. Maybe you failed miserably at first. That's okay. Every great leader has a story filled with mistakes. The difference is that they kept learning, and that's the key. Leadership is not a destination you arrive at. It's a skill you keep refining. The moment you think you've mastered it, you stop growing. The leaders who truly inspire us are the ones who remain students of leadership for life. They read, they listen, they watch, they reflect, and they adapt. When we stop telling ourselves the lie that leaders are born and instead embrace the truth that leadership is learned, we unlock the possibility for everyone. We create a culture where leadership is not a rare gift, but a shared responsibility. When you think back to the leaders who had the greatest impact on you, chances are it wasn't because they demanded perfection or forced compliance. It wasn't because they made you afraid of failing or afraid of speaking up. The leaders who truly left a mark on you were probably the ones who made you feel safe. The ones who made you believe that your voice mattered. The ones who created an environment where you could take risks, make mistakes, and still know you were supported. That is the essence of great leadership, creating safety and trust, not fear and compliance. Human beings are wired to respond to safety. When we feel safe, our brains open up, creativity flows, collaboration strengthens, and loyalty grows. On the other hand, when we feel threatened, whether by criticism, micromanagement, or the fear of being replaced, we shut down. Our focus shifts from doing our best work to simply protecting ourselves. In an environment of fear, innovation dies and trust evaporates. That is why true leadership cannot rely on compliance. Compliance may achieve short-term results, but it destroys long-term commitment. Consider a workplace where the culture is driven by fear. People show up, they do what they're told, they avoid making mistakes, and they keep their heads down. Yes, the work gets done, but only at the minimum level required. Nobody goes above and beyond. Nobody takes initiative. Nobody brings forward bold ideas because they're afraid of being punished if things go wrong. Now compare that to a team where the leader has built trust. People feel safe enough to take risks, to speak honestly, to admit when they don't know something. In that environment, creativity flourishes, collaboration thrives, and the team grows stronger with each challenge. Leadership is not about getting people to do what you say. It's about creating a space where they want to give their best. Compliance forces people to meet expectations. Trust inspires them to exceed them. And the difference between the two comes down to how a leader chooses to lead. One of the most powerful demonstrations of this comes from the military. Soldiers go into dangerous situations, sometimes even risking their lives, not because they are ordered to, but because they trust the person standing beside them. They trust that their leader will do everything possible to protect them. That trust doesn't come from authority. It comes from countless small actions over time, leaders who listen, who sacrifice, who stand with their people rather than above them. That is what makes people willing to follow, not because they have to, but because they want to. In the business world, the same principle applies. There are companies where leaders rule with fear, where employees are constantly worried about job security or about saying the wrong thing. In those places, stress is high, turnover is constant, and morale is low. But then there are organizations where leaders invest in building trust, by caring about people, by listening to concerns, by celebrating effort as much as results. Those companies don't just survive, they thrive. Their employees stay longer, work harder, and give more of themselves, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. Trust, however, is not built overnight. It is the accumulation of consistent behavior over time. It's showing up when it matters. It's keeping promises, even the small ones. It's admitting mistakes rather than hiding them. Leaders who lead with fear may get obedience, but leaders who lead with trust get commitment. And commitment is far more powerful than compliance ever will be. The best leaders understand that their job is not to be perfect, not to have all the answers, but to create an environment where people feel safe to contribute, safe to take risks, and safe to grow. Safety breeds trust, and trust breeds excellence. So many people believe leadership is about being in charge, about having authority, about being the one who makes the final call, who tells others what to do, who sits at the top of the hierarchy. But the truth is, leadership is less about being in charge and more about taking care of those in your charge. That shift in perspective changes everything. When we focus on being in charge, the spotlight stays on us. We worry about how we look, whether people respect us, whether we appear strong or decisive. But when we focus on taking care of the people in our charge, the spotlight shifts to them. Our attention goes to their needs, their fears, their hopes, and their growth. Leadership then becomes less about self-preservation and more about self-sacrifice. Think about parenting. Parents are, in a sense, leaders of their families. But great parents don't spend their time asserting authority for the sake of control. They spend their time nurturing, guiding, protecting, and making decisions that prioritize their children's well-being. They know that the role of a parent is not to be in charge of the child, but to take care of the child. The same applies to leadership in any context. In organizations, when leaders act like caretakers, people feel safe to focus on their work. They feel supported enough to take risks. They know that if they stumble, their leader will help them back up rather than punish them for falling. And this kind of leadership builds loyalty. People don't give their best because they have to. They give their best because they want to. They want to honor the trust that has been placed in them. On the other hand, when leaders see their role as simply being in charge, the dynamic is completely different. Employees feel the constant pressure to perform for the sake of the leader's approval. Mistakes are seen as weaknesses, and the fear of punishment overshadows the desire to innovate. Over time, this creates a culture where people are more concerned with avoiding blame than achieving excellence. In the end, performance suffers because people are not working for a shared purpose. They're working for survival. One of the best examples of this distinction comes from the military principle of officers eat last. It is a practice that reinforces the idea that leaders serve their people, not the other way around. A commanding officer's job is not to enjoy privileges, but to take care of the troops. They ensure their people are fed, rested, and cared for before themselves. That simple act symbolizes a powerful truth. Leadership is about protecting those in your care. In business, the same mindset applies. A CEO who spends more time understanding the challenges of their employees than worrying about their own perks creates an environment of trust and respect. Leaders who prioritize the health, growth, and well-being of their teams are the ones who see lasting results. Because when people know their leader has their back, they commit with their hearts, not just their hands. This idea that leadership is about taking care of people isn't about being soft or avoiding tough decisions. It doesn't mean leaders never discipline or never demand excellence. It means that when they do, it comes from a place of responsibility, not ego. It comes from a desire to help people grow, not to make themselves look powerful. And when people sense that difference, they respond with loyalty instead of resistance. The leaders we remember, the ones who truly change us, are not the ones who demanded the most from us, but the ones who gave the most to us. They are the ones who made sacrifices so we could thrive. They are the ones who stood with us when things were hard. They are the ones who understood that the greatest privilege of leadership is not being in charge, but taking care of those entrusted to you. When we think of leaders, we often imagine people standing on a stage, giving inspiring speeches, or delivering powerful instructions. We imagine someone telling others what to do and everyone following. But the truth is, the best leaders don't inspire people with their words alone. They inspire by their example. People may listen to what you say, but they will always follow what you do. It's easy to give instructions. It's easy to tell someone to work harder, be more committed, or stay focused. But if the leader is not modeling that same behavior, the words fall flat. People quickly recognize the difference between someone who talks about values and someone who lives them. And when there's a gap between words and actions, trust evaporates. Consistency is what earns respect, not speeches. Think about a workplace where a manager constantly tells the team to collaborate, yet that same manager never shares information, never supports others, and works in isolation. What happens? The team doesn't collaborate because people mirror behavior more than they obey words. On the other hand, imagine a leader who goes out of their way to share knowledge, who asks questions, who shows up to help a teammate struggling with a project. That team learns collaboration not because it was demanded of them, but because they saw it demonstrated every day. Leadership by example is one of the most powerful forms of influence. When a leader shows courage, others feel braver. When a leader admits mistakes, others feel safe to do the same. When a leader shows humility, others follow suit. The behavior of a leader creates the culture of the group. That's why it's not enough for leaders to talk about values like integrity, respect, or hard work. They have to embody those values in every decision, every interaction, every small moment. History gives us countless examples. Think of Mahatma Gandhi's simple life, choosing to dress, eat, and live like the people he was fighting for. He didn't ask people to sacrifice without first sacrificing himself. Or think of leaders in times of crisis who walk into the chaos alongside their teams rather than giving orders from a safe distance. Those leaders inspire loyalty not because of their words, but because of their presence. Even in everyday life, the principle holds true. Parents know this. Children rarely do what they are told. They do what they see. If you tell a child to be honest but you lie, they will learn dishonesty. If you tell them to be respectful, but they see you disrespecting others, they will learn disrespect. Leadership works the same way. People don't learn from instruction as much as they learn from example. There's also something deeply human about seeing a leader practice what they preach. It makes the leader relatable. It builds trust. It shows authenticity. When a leader rolls up their sleeves and does the hard work alongside their team, it communicates that they are not above the people they lead. They are part of the team, carrying the same weight, facing the same struggles. That is what makes people want to follow, not obligation, but inspiration. This is why leadership can never be about appearances or empty words. Anyone can stand at the front of a room and make demands. But it takes humility and consistency to show people the way forward by going first. And when leaders go first, when they live the values they ask others to uphold, they create a culture where people are not just told what to do, but shown how to do it. One of the most important truths about leadership is that it is never finished. Leadership is not a destination you arrive at or a title you achieve once and for all. It is a journey, a lifelong process of learning, adapting, and growing. The moment someone believes they have mastered leadership, they stop being a leader. Because leadership requires humility, and humility begins with the recognition that there is always more to learn. Think about any skill, playing an instrument, practicing medicine, or even teaching. No matter how much experience someone gains, there is always something new to improve, something new to refine, something new to discover. Leadership is no different. The best leaders are not those who claim to have all the answers, but those who remain curious, open, and willing to keep learning. This is why humility is such a critical part of leadership. Humility doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean insecurity. It means having the strength to admit you don't know everything. It means having the courage to ask questions, to seek advice, to listen deeply to others. Leaders who approach their role with humility show their teams that leadership is not about being perfect. It's about being human. And when leaders are human, people connect with them. They trust them. They follow them. The opposite is also true. When leaders stop learning, when they assume their position means they no longer have to grow, they begin to stagnate. They start leading from ego rather than service. They cling to old ways of thinking instead of adapting to new realities. Over time, they lose touch with their teams, their organizations, and the very people they are supposed to lead. And eventually, People stop following, not because they don't respect the position, but because they no longer respect the person. Great leadership, on the other hand, is a cycle of growth. Leaders learn from experience, they reflect on mistakes, and they adapt their approach. They seek out mentors and coaches. They read, they listen, they ask questions. Most importantly, they learn from the people they lead. Because leadership is not about standing above others, it is about walking alongside them. And when a leader listens and grows with their team, everyone rises together. Consider the leaders you admire most. Chances are they didn't present themselves as flawless. Instead, they admitted when they didn't know something. They were willing to learn from others, even those below them in the hierarchy. They showed vulnerability in a way that made you feel stronger, not weaker. That is what makes leadership a lifelong journey. Because people are constantly changing, the world is constantly changing, and leadership must constantly change too. Another key part of this journey is adaptability. The challenges leaders face today are not the same as the ones they faced 10 years ago, and they won't be the same as the ones they'll face 10 years from now. Leaders who understand that growth is continuous are the ones who stay relevant, who continue to inspire, and who remain effective no matter how the world evolves. At its core, leadership is about growth. Not just the growth of others, but your own growth as well. Every difficult conversation, every failure, every success, every moment of doubt is an opportunity to learn. Leaders who embrace that reality understand that they are students as much as they are teachers. And when people see their leader learning, they feel encouraged to learn too. Leadership, then, is not a static role. It is a living practice. It is a journey marked by humility, curiosity, and the constant pursuit of becoming better, not just for yourself, but for the people who trust you to lead them.